G to come back? Then
I'm
we'll
here.
just get it started.
I'm
Okay.
here.
I think then probably it's time. So let us get started. And I think there would be many participants who will just join on the way. So very good evening to all of those who are there in Germany. And maybe people might have already slept back in India, or a warm hello to everyone who's participating today. So thank you so much for taking out time. Today we are here in a special series organized by His Excellency Madan Lal Ji, the Consul General of India from Hamburg, and this series specially highlights uh, expats from Indian origin and their stories, how they have navigated across different countries, and especially in Germany. So I'll just hand over to Madan Lal Ji to give opening remarks, and then we'll go on to introduce our guest for today.
Very good evening. Thank you, Jubin, for initiating. And so today we welcome Professor Dr. Amrita Narlikar, an icon for the youth, an icon for the Indian diaspora, an icon and a person to look forward. In her young age, in Hindi we say that "Poot ke per palne mein dikh jate," So she's a child prodigy. She started very young, and at the age when we are struggling with the career, she is at the top. Today, we have Professor Dr. Amrita Narlikar. Her parents, distinguished person. I hope they also join today, and they'll be very happy uh, to hear her. And not only hear her, her story will be every Indian diaspora member who will be joining today. They will get inspired. They will get motivated. My interaction with the Narlikar family, and I would like to tell everyone that there's a narlikar.com. If anyone has not seen that web page, there's a 20-page series of every three members they have, and they have so much to tell about the books they wrote, her schooling in India, her masters in JNU, then Cambridge, and the professional career that as a profession, the lecturer, the professor she taught, and then coming today at the helm of affairs, the think tank GIGA. She's the president. So Amrita, without much ado and without wasting others' time, I give mic to Zubin.
Thank you so much, Madan Lal Ji.
And we are all looking forward to hear her today. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you so much
for coming on our this web series, which we started in August. Thanks a lot. And I'll be there in between also to comment and see.
Thank you, Madan Lal Ji, for your kind invitation, and thanks a lot also you invited us, especially me, for becoming part of this series. Thanks a lot to Amrita for taking out time from her busy schedule just to give a quick, perspective from my side. So it's always sometimes you need motivation in your career and look up to people who have built upon their career in a way where, okay, you want to understand what would be your next step. And when I was working in my last company, I was curating few people, and that's where I landed up to the profile of Amrita. And I found it, as in when I went more deeper, I found it so interesting with the work what she has done, with her family background and everyone in the family, who the kind of work what they're doing. So as Madan Lal Ji already pointed out, she is the president right now for GIGA, which stands for German Institute of Global and Area Studies. She's a full professor at the University of Hamburg. In general, she has a very long CV. I think it would take too much time to go into that, but what we can do is we can split up into the different conversations what we'll have today. The aim of this conversation is to keep it lighter and not make it like too technical or too heavy. So if anyone has any questions or find it interesting, please just put your message in the chat box, or you can also send your questions to us and we'll put it across. And I am pretty sure Amrita would be happy to take it up. So with that, also Madan Lalji pointed out that Amrita has written many books. We'll also go through some of those, the work behind that. But maybe to start with, Amrita, let's go back many years back, and understand how was your childhood and where it started from. So maybe if you can start from there, that would be pretty nice.
Okay, thank you very much. Sort of first and foremost, a very big thank you to Madan Lal ji for putting together this really great series, and it is an honor for me to be a part of this. And you have done so much for all of us in Hamburg and in Germany, and we are very grateful to have a consul general like you. We're big fans of yours, so thank you very much. When you asked me to do this, there is absolutely no way that I could have ever said no to Madan Lalji. And Jubin, thank you very much for taking such a kind interest and committing to the task with so much enthusiasm and gusto. And to both of you, thank you for the kind words, of very generous words of introduction. Okay, so Jubin, you said start off with my childhood, right? So let me start off by telling you about the smell. And the smell, it is the aroma, it is the beautiful aroma of pulao. Pulao rice is being cooked. And I'm about 3 years old, and we have guests at our house, and my mother is in the kitchen and she's cooking the food, and we're going to have some international scientists, colleagues of my daddy's, to visit. And my dad is there to keep me company while my mom is in the kitchen. So he's babysitting me, and he's telling me the most amazing stories, because my father tells the most beautiful stories, right? And stories also that he makes up of animals, and they are just, you don't find them in any books. They're very cool. And then my mom will escape from the kitchen and she'll bring me a star-shaped puri. Normal people will get round puris, but little Amrita gets a star-shaped puri, or a moon-shaped puri, or just a heart-shaped puri. So this is very nice. So that's sort of like the childhood. And another nice memory that I have is, and this is like, I think I was very, very small, right? Like, I mean, sort of maybe a year or something. And my father, a year old, and my father would put me on his knee, and he would be moving me backwards and forwards and to the right and to the left, right? And he would be telling me, how was the ship moving? It was moving to the front, and it was moving to the back, and it was swaying to the left and to the right. Where was the ship going? Where was it taking Amrita? It was taking her to Cambridge, right? And so he would be teaching me, and my mother would come and say, what are you doing? This child is going to be sick on you, right? And he would be like, no, I'm just preparing her for the ship journey to take her to Cambridge, because she's going to study in Cambridge. And, this is me, a year old or something. So my father really instilled in me a love of research, of academia. He studies superconductors, superconductivity, and nanoscience. And my mother she's from literature. She has a doctorate in literature. She's an artist, she's an author. And through her, I really started enjoying multimedia. So she hosted television shows for Doordarshan, for example. So they're both very different, and I got different aspects of their personalities, I think. And I was also very close to my grandparents, my mother's parents, as a child. And my grandma, who was a scholar also of the Mahabharata, she used to tell me stories from the Mahabharata and Ramayana, and she used to teach me bhajans. And so when I sing a bhajan, I still sing in a really Marathi accent. So when I speak Hindi, I don't think I sound like I have an accent, but you hear me sing and you'll go, oh yeah, she's from Maharashtra. Right? And like, I was the only child, but I wasn't really the only child, because I had my dog. I had my wonderful little dog. So that's what my childhood memories are. Some of them.
Taking a cue from there, you mentioned that you have the memory of this pulao, and you guessed who were international scientists. I think if anyone Googles you, they understand what kind of family background you have, and all of them are academic achievers with a rich history of literacy, research, and quest for knowledge. Did you realize that early, or when did you understand, okay, my parents were also those kind of achievers?
I did. I think I did. That I think I knew quite early on that they were very intelligent. My parents are very intelligent. It's something I kind of knew quite early on, and that they're also high achievers, and so are my grandparents and granduncles. And so in that sense, like expectations on me were also quite high. But I think to my parents' credit, they have always challenged me, but they've avoided putting me under pressure. So in fact, like, I'll give you an example. My mom got into the habit of telling me before I went for every exam, right, from school to college to university, she'd say to me, go have fun in the exam, right? And I actually really started enjoying exams. And so in St. Stephen's, where I studied, I remember our ancient Indian history teacher gave us a surprise test. And all the other students were like, oh, we have a surprise test. Oh God, we have a surprise test. And I was like skipping and jumping and going, we have a surprise test. We have a surprise test. Right? And so I was a little bit like a Hermione Granger, right? So with my parents. And I think that came that sense of that recognition of their achievement, but also freedom to be who I was. I think that really came also from their achievement, because they were not putting me under pressure. And they also told me, they really taught me to stand true to myself. So it was like, even in school, I could see that I was more independent, sometimes too independent, than in thought, in mind, than a lot of other children were. And I could see that was unusual, right? And I mean, in an Indian context, but also in probably any context, that I was asked for my views since a very young age, and I was supposed to have coherent arguments to be able to explain why I was taking the position that I did.
Yeah. I think that is very remarkable. Also, anyone who follows your work, or even as simple as follows your Twitter feeds, they would understand your connect with language, and especially Sanskrit. So how would you take that from your childhood? How did you connect to the language?
So I always liked language. And I think it's partly because since I can remember, I had 4 languages in my life, right? So Sanskrit, Marathi, Hindi, and English. And then I learned some French, and now I'm into German. So I've always liked language. And I also like grammar, right? Like I like structure, and I love grammatical structures, and Sanskrit grammar is amazing, right? So when I was very, very little, so, just the way kids are taught nursery rhymes, I was being taught Sanskrit shlokas, partly because my parents wanted me to, they thought that knowing Sanskrit would allow me to understand other Indian languages. And also because the belief in the family was that it helps improve your pronunciation if you learn Sanskrit from a very early age. So when other kids were saying when Jack and Jill went up the hill, I was being taught Akashat Patitam Toyam, Yathagachati Sagaram, things like that. So there was always this feeling that we were connected to this ancient language, right? Even while we were doing modern things. And then I remember like kids used to play Antyakshari, this game where you sing a song, a line of a song, and then the last letter of that line, the next person sings another line with the same with that last ending letter. So normally kids in my school would be singing Bollywood songs, and we would be playing Antyakshari with Sanskrit shlokas, right? And so this is what it was like. And this was my parents and my grandparents. And so this was just something everybody was into. So I'm still into it.
On a lighter note, because you mentioned you like structures, so in that context, you're nearly becoming German. Okay, maybe taking a leap forward, maybe how would you describe your experience at St. Stephen's and GNU?
So St. Stephen's was fine. I had some great teachers there. And I mean, St. Stephen's is a very special world, you know, sort of the Oxbridge of India. But having said that, JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University, was just amazing. And so I came first in the All India entrance exam for the MA in International Studies, which was a good omen, perhaps. And what was so special about the School of International Studies at JNU, and this was the first and maybe the only time, I think it's the only time in my life where I felt that people did not judge you for anything else than your ideas and your ability to express them. So it didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, class didn't matter, caste didn't matter, creed, your beliefs didn't matter, your appearance didn't matter, gender didn't matter. It didn't matter whether you were a man or a woman. Nothing else mattered, just your ideas mattered. And it was and I mean, I have that with friends, I have that with close members of my family, but in an institution, that is really special. And it was the first time in my life, I think, when I felt it was okay to be clever. You know, that there was no such thing as being too clever. And the teachers were also like, they rewarded you for high performance. They appreciated you. They did everything possible to make you achieve your full potential, your creativity, your excellence. And I think it was the happiest time in my life thus far. And in fact, while I was studying, I enjoyed studying there so much that I broke the academic record for the master's at the School of International Studies, because it was a very special place.
I think this is the first time where I'm really interacting with an alumni from JNU, because I never had a chance of doing that, and it's really impressive to hear the thoughts of a person who's coming from there, because you hear a lot in media, but you never, I mean, unless and until you talk to a person from the university, you never know how the university functions or what motivates students to like really go ahead. Maybe also in this context, did you, because you are such an achiever, did you ever struggle with career choices? Or like, I mean, I had my moments where it was so difficult to understand, okay, what would be the next step? But did you ever had that moment?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, so there was a time when I thought I wanted to do literature. Then I wanted to do journalism. Then I wanted to do advertising, and so on and so forth. But the one thing that I think was clear was that I really liked writing, and I'm only happy when I'm writing. So that was the common theme with all those sort of crazy ideas that I had of the things I might want to do. I still have sometimes, right? Yeah. And I mean, of course, I mean, that sort of comes with this feeling. There's also, you know, there's always sort of this fear of failing that a lot of my friends tell me about, right? And I think this is where, because like learning and everything else was supposed to be fun, right? Because that's all I know, right? Like, I mean, what do you do for fun? Sort of, you know, I read and I learn and I write. And so that's supposed to be fun. And so failure was also okay, at least for my parents, right? I mean, the deal there was, you can fail. as long as you learn from the process. Right? So I don't know if you know this line. I think I'm slightly paraphrasing it. It's Churchill, and it's something like, success is not final, defeat is not fatal. What matters is the courage to go on. And it's something I always try and tell myself when I don't perform like I'm hoping I will.
Yeah, because your next step is an international move in your career. So what were the key factors that assisted you in making that decision? Was it your father's storytelling in the early childhood, or you had a different viewpoint about why you should go and do international studies?
So international studies was sort of like, I was interested in questions of cooperation, right? International cooperation. And I sort of knew that I wanted to write and study things that could have an impact on the real world. So I didn't just sort of want to be an ivory tower person. So I think that for that reason, international relations. And I think you're right. I think I was very influenced by my father's stories and, the ship journey that I was being prepared for. But of course I had to rebel, right? So of course I had to have my rebellion. So when normal kids go and get their belly buttons pierced, my parents told me I was going to go to Cambridge. So I went to Oxford. Right. That was like I got a scholarship and I went to Oxford.
Okay, so you've mentioned about Oxford. So why specifically Oxford? Did you ever think of selecting any other option, or was that like your first option?
I really think it was a little bit of the rebellion, right?
Okay.
So which is the competing university for Cambridge? It's Oxford, right? And my grandfather, father, granduncle, everybody studied at Cambridge. So I'm not going to go to Cambridge. I'll go to Oxford. But I mean, having said that, the international relations program there is a very good program. It's one of the best in the world. So I went there for content, because I knew I would get access to great teachers and good training. And I also didn't want to go to the US. So there was a little bit of that. And so I was very happy when I got the scholarship, and it meant that I could go to Oxford, because it also meant that I didn't have to go to the US.
Yeah. And so this was your first move internationally. Like, I remember my first time when I came to Germany. There were very interesting experiences, like my first flight or landing up here and reaching just the Studentenwohnheim in the uni was a complete different journey. So if you take that first few months or first few days, how was your transition from JNU to Oxford culturally and also in terms of the mindset?
Yeah. You came to Heidelberg, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That must have been very dramatically beautiful also.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that sense, maybe it was not so different. I mean, I'd been to Cambridge and Oxford before as a child.
Yeah.
In a way, maybe the transition was not very dramatic, partly because of, my dad had been telling me about the college system, about how you wear academic gowns, about the language that is different. So St. Stephen's was a little bit like Oxbridge. So I had some of that, but I think it was also because, the poetry that I would read or the books that I would read, like Matthew Arnold was one of my favorite poets. And he wrote a poem called The Scholar Gypsy. And that was about Oxford. So it was, in a way, it felt like I was in a place that I had been reading all my life. Plus, I also went to a very nice college when I was there. Balliol is my college. And I lived in their graduate accommodation, which was called Holywell Manor. And we were really, really well looked after, right? I mean, we were loved and cared for. I think it might not have been so easy if it had been a different college, but at every level, right? From from the master of the college to the administrator of Holywell Manor, to to the electrician who made sure that my room would be not too cold, because I was always cold coming from India, right? And so I think we were very well looked after while we were there.
But did you find any difference, because you had always heard about the university, but now you were in a different, let's say, phase of your career, or you were in the university, in terms of the mindset, like putting out opinions, and was it countable, or was there any major shift in that sense?
I mean, I would think I had never, for example, I never lived away from home when I went to Oxford, right? And so this whole feeling of you're on your own when you're there, even no matter how well looked after you are, right? It also took me a little, I was not super assertive, right? I was also, despite all that upbringing, right? I was not very assertive. And I was, in fact, I didn't like public speaking. Now it's sort of a part of my job, right? So a lot of it was also learning and training. So I think the core was there and the core will remain unchanged. But in terms of presentation, a lot of that was something I learned as I went along, and I kind of feel like I'm still learning.
So what were the best or the fond memories of your days at Oxford?
So like I had pretty amazing teachers and friends when I was there, and I've remained in touch with some of them. And actually both Oxford and Cambridge, right, were wonderful experiences in some regard. So interdisciplinary conversations over candlelit dinners in college, right, where you wear your academic gowns and you're sitting next to a mathematician and you're discussing you're telling them about the main argument of your thesis or your book, right? And they're helping you choose the cover for your book. It was a very stimulating atmosphere. And you also got to having sort of academic exchanges, intellectual exchanges with international luminaries. And there was a whole social side to it, which was like garden parties in the college and croquet and punting on the river, amazing libraries, right? So it was, now looking back on it, sort of that was normal for a very long time. But now looking back on it, some of it was almost like, I was going to say fairy tale, but I'll go with Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit like Alice in Wonderland. And one of my favorite memories at Oxford is when I taught my first course at the MPhil level. And this was a course called the International Relations of the Developing World. And it was with one of my teachers. It was a jointly taught course. And I learned a lot in the process. And only last week, she wrote to me to say that they're going to be using my latest book in this course. So this made me very happy. It was the course that I taught. Now they're reading my books.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure this conversation would also be heard by many aspiring students or professionals who are looking to move around. When you moved to Oxford, did you find any specific skill set which helped you at that time? Not the direct technical skills, but maybe something outside the box which you think might be helpful for students these days?
I think the most important thing is sort of amidst all the different, it's like getting a balance. I can't say that I did it always myself, right? But it's something that I tried to do. And it's about getting a balance between, on the one hand, being open to learning new things and meeting new people and learning about new cultures, but also remaining true to yourself, right? Because if you're not true to yourself, then it's like you get hollowed out, right? And so that's not always very easy to do for anyone. and I think that was one of the things that really helped me. I think that's one of the things that also helped me in gaining some of the friends that I did, that who have stood by me for a long time. So I think sort of being true to yourself while at the same time being open to different people, different cultures, new experiences, but not forgetting your values.
Right. You said you had a bit of a rebel, that you didn't want to go to Cambridge, but you still went there. So your next move to Cambridge, what led you there?
So that was like a little bit of a family joke, right? Like they were like, yeah, the prodigal child sees the light, the prodigal child finally returns. And before it used to be like, where did we go wrong with our upbringing? Why did she go to Oxford? So so that was a little bit of the joke that, finally I saw the light and I went to Cambridge. I mean, in fact, I went there because it was a permanent job, right? And that's something that's what you want. That's what you need in academia. If you want to stay in academia, eventually you want to have a permanent job. I was happy to get it quite early on in my career. And I also liked Cambridge. Right? I knew it a little bit, as I'd been there when I was very young, and it's a town that I like. So, and it was sufficiently different from Oxford, but not dramatically different from Oxford. So the transition, I figured, would not be too hard. It was actually quite different.
Yeah, on the lighter side, I think even your family now would be happy to have you as an alumni of Oxford, especially because now there's a vaccine coming from there. So I think it's fair enough. Okay. So next phase of your career is your move to Germany from Cambridge. I think it's sometimes I had a time where you listen to a conversation between a German person and a British person, and it's also a bit funny, and understanding different cultural mindset. So you moved from being for such a long phase of your career in UK, then to Germany. So why Germany, and especially the institute GIGA?
Okay, so it was not like I was dying to get out of Cambridge, right? I mean, I had good colleagues, supportive. My head of school was wonderfully supportive. The master of my college was very supportive. But it sort of progressively, I was thinking it was getting too gemütlich, right? It was getting too cozy. It was getting a little bit boring. And so I thought that I wanted to find out about it. At that time, when I came here in 2014, at that time, there were one of the big questions in international relations and international political economy, foreign policy, was questions of global order and the role that the rising powers could play, the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And so I thought I would just leave Cambridge and go and go to India and go to Brazil and so forth, and learn about, their views of global order, right? And then my head of school said to me, "You crazy person, nobody just sort of leaves position in Cambridge. Don't do that. Take leave for 2 years and see if you really like this, because I think you're somebody who will not like being away from Cambridge for that long." And that was very nice of him. So he helped me get leave for 2 years. And just when I was thinking, like, I'm going to go to start with India because that's the country I know, and then go to Brazil because I know a little bit about Brazil, just then I was asked to apply for the GIGA presidency. And then I thought I could sort of go to all these different countries and try and get little pieces of that puzzle. Or I could go to an institute where there are many people who are working on similar questions on the global south, on the world regions. and I could still develop the project that I wanted to develop. And so that's why I came to the GIGA, and that's how I ended up leaving Cambridge. But it was also, I must say, that the two countries with which I had the most interaction other than India were the UK and Germany. And my dad, and so my mom and I had accompanied my dad to Germany before. Not the North. The North was new. Hamburg's new, relatively speaking. But to the south. So, for example, I remember going to Heidelberg and thinking it was very beautiful. And we had a lot of German visitors to our house because my dad had collaborations with them. So it sort of, Germany felt closer to home than many other places. So that's also why I might not have come to the GIGA had it been in another country.
Also, one of the questions which naturally comes, like I mean, I had an academic background until last couple of years. And I mean, if you look even at statistics, most people move out of research or the traditional research after their PhD or postdoctorate, including me. But was remaining in academia a natural choice for you? Or did you think of any corporate jobs or alternative options after your time in UK?
Well, I mean, I don't know, one always toys with other possibilities, right? Like, I mean, I've always thought of other possibilities, but I have to say that I keep coming back to academia, right? I mean, I kind of play with the idea of leaving and then I kind of end up staying. And I think that's like for a couple of reasons. I think the most important one is the freedom that you have, right? The intellectual freedom that you have, that you don't have to toe a party line. And that for me is quite important. And I love the research and writing part of my job. I really enjoy engaging with practitioners, and the GIGA gave me more of that. I used to do it when I was in Cambridge as well. But in my role at the GIGA and the nature of the institute, the fact that we're a Leibniz institute and the Leibniz is committed to theoria cum praxi, it means we're supposed to engage with practitioners, and that I really enjoy. And I like knowing that my research can have an impact on the real world. Plus, I like teaching, right? So in terms of intellectual stimulus and as well as engaging with real people, I end up sort of staying in academia, even though I have been tempted and I probably will be tempted again.
Although you have visited Germany even before, but I think this was the first time you connected professionally. At least that's what I understand from your CV. How were your initial days and experience with the German culture as a person who understands it now completely and not from the childhood angle?
That's a great question. And I mean, in a way, coming to Germany from the UK was more of a culture shock for me than going from India to the UK. So I give you one example. So I was very surprised when I came here and people just kept omitting the doctor and the professor title, and they kept calling me Mrs. Right? So I asked some of the friendly people who I had just met about why this was the case, and they told me that it was elitist to use titles. And this I found really strange, because in the UK and in most other countries that I've had the pleasure to spend some time in, you make a distinction between titles that people have earned rather than just inherited, right? And if you've earned your title, right, like you are Dr. Shah, right? And I quite like knowing that you earned your title, and sometimes I might call you Dr. Shah, right? And so you use the doctor title with readiness. You don't kind of think of elitism. So this this surprised me. And then what really irritated me was they kept calling me Mrs., which is technically not even true, right? And then what irritated me even more was they would address men with their titles. So it was Professor X and Dr. Y and Mrs. Narlikar, right? Which is the wrong title. So at one point, like, I answered the phone and the woman on the phone said, "Can I speak to your husband?" I was like, "I don't have a husband, but you can speak to me." And then she said, "But I was told to contact Professor Narlikar, who I assumed was your husband." And I was like, I was shocked. And I was also amused by this. So I gave her a lecture that sometimes, if they work very hard, girls could be professors too. And I mean, just to be clear, like, I'm actually very happy to be addressed with Miss or Doctor or Professor or my first name, right? So that's not the problem. But that was the whole that whole experience sort of took some getting used to. And it sort of went on.
Because you mentioned specifically this point, it takes me to the next question. I mean, typically, at least in the health sciences, I think it's a bit more relaxed. At least it's improving. But the question about gender, did you, I mean, ever face a challenge apart from the point what you are mentioning, especially in the decision making? Because now you're also in the decision making position.
So, I mean, I guess I would be lying if I said that I've never wondered what life would be like as a tall, old white man, right? I have wondered, whether life would be quite a bit easier if I were, 6 foot tall, 60-year-old white man. And it's also true that I do get quite a lot of mansplaining. Even in areas of my own expertise. But having said that, like, people usually fixate, people talk about the old white man syndrome, but they often fixate on the man part. And I actually think more attention maybe needs to go to the white part and possibly also the old part, because I don't think it's that easy for men of color either. And in my case, separating which element is at work is, of course, harder because I am younger than your average director, your average president, and I'm smaller. If we were doing this in person, you would see I'm a little bit smaller and I'm not white, etc. Right? So ultimately, like, if you push me on it, I'll probably end up saying, I guess life is harder for anyone who is different in any way. Right?
Yeah.
And this is not only gender. And as I don't really fit in an obvious mold, I just don't fit into an obvious box, I think it makes some people angry and uncomfortable. But it's not always bad, right? So not fitting in an obvious mold also allows me a different perspective on things. And it also wins me friends and allies that I might not otherwise have. So I think it balances out.
Yeah. I mean, how would you describe, I mean, it's also been now 5 to 6 years that you have been in Germany. How would you describe your overall experience? I think it should be a mixed bag, but still, is there any part which makes Germany special for you outside of your work?
So overall, on balance, I would say that my experience in Germany has been pretty amazing, right? So, I mean, with the caveat that I don't fit the mold, I don't fit the expected mold. So it's true, I don't make everybody happy, right? That sort of almost goes without saying. But I have met some incredible people here, and who've done everything they possibly can to make my family and me feel welcome. And so just like a couple of examples. So I was invited to travel as a guest with our federal president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, on a state visit to India. And this was a remarkable experience. And I learned a lot about both Germany and also India, sort of looking at India with German eyes.
Yeah.
And sort of earlier this year, I was asked to chair a ministerial meeting of some 20 foreign ministers. And this meeting was hosted by the foreign minister of Germany and France on the Alliance for Multilateralism. And again, I thought that was a very special opportunity. And then not everybody loves the fact that I'm a bit of an insider and a bit of an outsider, but it's this very perspective, this insider outsider perspective that sometimes turns out to be an advantage. So I was invited to give a keynote at the 150th anniversary celebrations of the Federal Foreign Office. And then I wrote a piece on this, and the piece was on an inside-outside perspective on the German debate on multilateralism, on the German conversation on multilateralism. So in that sense, Germany has been very welcoming. And I think it's also a little bit like, you said what makes Germany special outside of work, right? The examples I gave you are mainly work. And here, I think the answer's got to be the people. So my really wonderful, trusted colleagues at the GIGA and the friends, the people, the ones who work so hard to keep me here, and the ones who stand by us in this very difficult time, this pandemic. That's why we're not doing this in person, so it affects us all. And there are a few people who I feel really stand by us, and the ones who teach me German poetry, right? So that's what makes Germany special. It's the people from whom I get quite a lot of commitment.
So not as a nostalgic view, because you have spent your career in India, UK, and Germany, how have you seen the world changing around you from your childhood until now, maybe?
So this is quite a tough question, right? It's quite a tough question. And so I'll just say it a little bit. I'll try and say it factually rather than emotionally, right? And so, like, growing up, for me, it was like, I'm a global citizen, right? Globalization is going to change the world. We're going to have open borders. We're going to have free trade. We're going to get prosperity. We're going to get peace. Multilateral institutions are a way of achieving that. And increasingly, I see that's not the case, right? I think sort of in a way, what this pandemic shows us really, and this point has been coming up in the last, it's not just the pandemic, and since the last couple of years, what we're seeing is that maybe globalization is not the answer for everything, right? And maybe prosperity isn't, and well-being are not automatically going to lead to peace. And so that, so there was, so for example, Trump, right? Trump and America first. And I have a lot of friends here who, when Trump first came to power, would always say, this is really a problem. We have an American president who keeps saying America first and who doesn't support multilateralism. And I then started realizing and also pointing it out that the two are in fact not in opposition. And if you're a democratically elected leader, you should be putting your nation first, right? If, otherwise you will get a backlash against globalization, against all the things that I too have believed in, right? And so, but if you want to put your nation first, you support multilateralism, right? Because that's the only way you will put your nation first. and it will need to be a reformed multilateralism. So, so you asked me how the world has changed, and I think we're seeing I don't think everybody's seeing it yet, but we're seeing the problems. That some of our now seemingly naive beliefs led us to the policies that we did put in place, right? And now I think sort of maybe the world isn't quite as globalized as it, and we're probably going to see a little bit of a turnaround. And a few years ago, I would have said that's a terrible thing, right? And now I will say, well, there is sometimes a balance that needs to be struck between trade and security, because interdependence can be weaponized, because you have geoeconomics and not just geopolitics, right? And so this is quite a lot about my analytic work, but it's also interesting because it makes me rethink some of the very basic assumptions that I had about the world.
So you spoke about multilateralism. I know this is your core topic, like your expertise. And being an outsider, still I would like to ask that question. How do you see multilateralism, especially in the Indian context, in the current scenario?
So India has always it's not been an easy negotiating partner for the West, but it has been a committed multilateralist. Now I think India is not the only country that stands on this turning point. Many other countries do. There is a risk that we might see a return towards much more inward-looking policies, right? Much less liberalization. That's one possibility that could be the takeaway from most recently the pandemic, right? But also the border clashes that India's had with China. What does that mean for India's role in multilateralism? So there's one possibility, one pathway where India might become more inward-looking. I don't think that will be the case, and I hope that will not be the case, because India has a history of being a very active player in multilateral institutions. And what I hope will happen, and there is a serious possibility to believe that it could happen, not just hope that it happens, is that India works much more closely with other like-minded countries. Doesn't have to be a formal alliance, doesn't have to be it doesn't mean that you form another NATO, right? But it does mean that you work with countries that are like-minded, and with those like-minded countries, you have deeper levels of integration, and you have decoupling or diversification from countries with which you do not share that like-mindedness. By like-mindedness, I mean principles of liberalism, democracy, pluralism, and so forth, right? And in that sense, India, if the West plays its cards right, and if India is open to some of those advances, this could be a very promising move, not only for these different parties, Western countries, EU, US, and India, but also multilateralism, right? Also international institutions, so global goods. So I think we're living in very dangerous times, but also times where there may be an unprecedented opportunity to build a liberal order, a liberal order where liberalism is broadly defined, right? Not a liberalism where the West tells the global South what liberalism means, but recognizes that there are ancient civilizations like India, which do have long-standing traditions of liberalism and pluralism.
So you spoke about the dangerous time, and I think the pandemic is the biggest danger which we are all aware of. You've also been writing on the topic. So how do you see the Germany's way of handling pandemic, and what are the lessons to be learned?
So to start with, I think all of us who are in Germany should feel very grateful that we're in Germany and not in many other countries, right? And Germany has handled this pandemic well in comparison to Sweden or the US or the UK and so on and so forth, right? Even within Europe, Germany has done a good job. Where I have also criticized Germany in some of my writings is Germany got an advantage, but they didn't retain it, right? We are in the second wave, and that second wave is and at a time when we know there is a very serious risk that hospitals will be overwhelmed. And one of the reasons, I argue, one of the reasons why Germany has not done as good a job as it is certainly capable of doing and could have done is the narrative. So, for example, Chancellor Merkel very early on in March said that there's this pandemic, there is this disease, but it affects the old and the sick the most, right? And I worry that led a lot of people to think that they were all safe. But this is a novel virus. In March, no one knew how it was really going to affect young people too. Now we know there is such a thing as long COVID, right? And so in my eyes, the narrative could have been more inclusive, the way it was in New Zealand. New Zealand is just one example. There are many others one can take, right? In Scotland, it's been a more inclusive narrative. In Taiwan, it's been a more inclusive narrative. In Australia, too, it's been a more inclusive narrative, right? And that narrative is one, this is a danger that affects our entire society, and we have to do everything we can to stop it, right? And then the other trade-off that has been made, and Germany, it is partly guilty of this because the virologists were arguing very early on in May. They were saying, don't reopen too quickly. We never had a real lockdown. And whatever we did, the virologists were saying, be careful. Don't reopen too quickly. Don't have the Lockerung so quickly. And turns out they were right? And this is partly because and this is again, not only Germany, many other countries too, the narrative has been one where governments have said that the economic costs of curtailing the spread of the virus are too high, right? But I think what we're also seeing in the success stories, again, New Zealand is the most successful example here, where Ardern said she wanted to stamp it out. She didn't want people to live with COVID, right? She said, we have to stamp it out. And they managed to stamp it out, right? And so in that sense, Germany could have done a better job. Now, to the credit of the Chancellor, she has updated her narrative, right? So since the past couple of weeks, she has been saying, do it for yourself. Don't do it for old people, right? When she came back, I think it was early October, when she made that speech, she said, don't do it for yourself. Do it for yourself. Don't do it for other people. You're helping yourself by maintaining Abstand, for example, by wearing masks, for example, when she appealed to the entire population not to go out unless it was absolutely notwendig, absolutely necessary, right? So she has been changing her narrative. The question is whether she's been pushing it hard enough. And of course, there's a problem of the federal structure. And there is a lot of demand from the lender, some of the lender not to continue with the Lockerungen. So we'll see how this plays out. But this is why I've been critical. And one of the I've written a piece for the Observer Research Foundation, where I talked about how in poorer countries of the global South, people are having to choose between livelihood and life. So you have to decide whether you will die of hunger or will you die of COVID. What we are arguing over, right, in Germany is not livelihood and life. We're arguing over lifestyle and life. And this is a problem, right? And it's a very serious problem for a country that believes that there is a society, right? It's not an individualistic culture. So here it should be clear that we're arguing, we should not be choosing lifestyle over life. We should be choosing life.
Yeah. So we are also entering the last phase of our conversation. I think the time just went by. So if anyone also has some questions, please put it forward. Because we are also going a bit towards your work. Maybe a quick question on your book, your latest book, which is Poverty Narratives and Power Paradoxes in International Trade Negotiations and Beyond. If, as a layman, I have to understand what the book is about and why should I take up a copy of that, how would you motivate me to take this book?
Well, you should like the cover to begin with.
Yeah.
So you can see it's called Power Paradoxes, and it's about the pawn, but it's showing the shadow of the queen, right? The pawn can become a queen. And so the book is most immediately about the case study, if you wish, is about trade, right? And it's about how developing countries have used poverty narratives to acquire tremendous voice in international trade negotiations. And so I look at three phases. I look at the period when developing countries pushed very hard to get voice and favorable outcomes in the failed International Trade Organization, the organization that was never born, the GATT, which is the predecessor of the World Trade Organization, and then the World Trade Organization, right? So those are the three organizations, three institutions. And in the first phase, they push very hard unsuccessfully. In the second phase, this is the phase of empowerment, and it sort of happens around the turn of the millennium, when developing countries show ways in which you can harness narratives to your advantage. India is one of those countries, along with Brazil and along with least developed countries, right? They work in coalitions, they frame issues differently, and so forth. That's the second phase. And the third phase is when you get an overuse and a misuse of poverty narratives. And the misuse of poverty narratives is, for example, when President Trump says in his inaugural address in 2017, he says, the reason why Americans are poor is because all our jobs are going abroad, right? Now, that may be a very tiny part of the story, but in fact, there are lots of other reasons why there is increasing inequality in the US and elsewhere. And it has to do with technological change, lack of welfare mechanisms, lack of social safety nets, lack of good training mechanisms when people lose jobs so that they can transition into others, so on and so forth. When the president of the US uses a poverty narrative, that is a misuse of the narrative. Right. So the cases, so sort of the detail is on trade, international trade, but there's also, I also give a lot of other examples, right, from climate change, from G20, and also from daily life, where I argue that narratives work like acid bubbles, right? They are prone to successful narratives get picked up. In this case, they're used not only by the powerless, others, the more powerful, learn to use those same narratives as well, right? And that's a misuse. And then that narrative loses its value. And who gets the most badly affected by this? It's the poorest of the poor, right? And so it's making a broader point about how do you build winning narratives? How do you build winning narratives? How do you, and how do narratives evolve? How do they die? Right? And how do you sustain winning narratives? And in that sense, this is a book. I mean, I wanted to address some of these bigger questions because, for example, you see this also in the case of multilateralism, right? It's clear that multilateral institutions have helped in bring about peace and prosperity for almost 70 years, many of them. But if political leaders and heads of international organizations are unable to explain to people what are the gains of multilateralism for them, then why would anyone support multilateralism? Right? And why and if we, people who believe that multilateralism can make a difference, if we fail to come up with a good narrative, what we will get is outcomes like the Brexit outcome in the referendum. What we will get is someone like Trump, somebody even more extreme than Trump. We will get populism, right? And if you want to control this, it means we have to understand how narratives work. And so this book is partly about trade, but it's also very much about how the weak, the poor, the powerless can get empowered. And it's a book about how do you build winning narratives.
Because we are talking about the book, I think there are very few people in this world who might have got a chance to co-author a book with their mother. So I wanted to also take a moment to go towards that book about bargaining with a rising India and lessons from Mahabharata, which is co-authored with your mother. So what was the motivation, and maybe a quick point on that? What does the book say?
Okay, so this is the book, Bargaining with the Rising India. And it came out in 2014. It was published with Oxford University Press. And the driver for us to write this book was that there's a lot of writing on how India is not the easiest of negotiating partners, right? And this comes from different disciplines, people who study negotiations across different issue areas. It's economic, it's foreign policy, and so forth, business. Why are the Indians so difficult to work with, right? And then there are lots of studies, for example, on the impact of Confucianism on how the Chinese negotiate, right? Or how, or Sun Tzu and so forth. But there was not very much on do traditional ideas matter in the Indian case. And so we wanted to look at that. Especially in a country that, it's a civilization, and it's a country where many of those traditions are lived traditions, right? So people still name their children after the heroes of the Mahabharata. The gods of the Mahabharata are still worshipped. It's very much a part of our daily lives, this text. So that's why we ended up choosing the Mahabharata to understand India's traditions. And we talked about the Ramayana, but the Mahabharata is really interesting because it's a really political text, right? The Ramayana is much more about the ideal, but the Mahabharata is all about politics, and people think of it as a book about war, right? But in fact, all of it is a book about negotiation. It's about the efforts to avoid a war. It's about negotiations that take place after the war, during the war, and then negotiations that take place after the war. So it's actually a book about negotiation. And my grandma has written several books on women in the Mahabharata. And my mother has a very strong interest in particularly the Mahabharata. She's interested in other texts too, but especially the Mahabharata. So we played a game. We said, what are the three things that you want to write on? What are the three things I want to write on? And turned out we were both interested in understanding where India's coming from to the negotiating table, right? And and it's not a causal link, right? It's not like we're saying people, negotiator X read the Mahabharata and therefore he negotiates like this. Not at all. It's like the Annals school of history. It's what we're saying is there's some ideas that are so hardwired into a culture that they become a part of that country's negotiation strategy. And so this is why I was really excited to see Dr. Jayashankar's book, because he's also talking about the India way, right? And there was a nice review by Dr. Raja Mohan of his book, where he also talked about our book, and that was cool. He had nice things to say about our book.
Okay, so what we do is in the last part, I have some quick questions like one-liners, and those are a bit personal questions. So in case if you want to also skip some of them, I would be okay with that. Maybe, so you, because we already spoke about your family, all of them being achiever. So now when you, your father and mother, all of you sit together, what is the discussion about? Is it about multilateralism, superconductivity, or Sanskrit language?
It's all those things, actually. It's all those things at different points of time. We're all also together reading the Bhagavad Gita, right? It's like my father learned very large parts of it as a child, right? My mother learned one chapter. I did not learn any one chapter, but I knew quite a lot. I read a lot of the shlokas when I was little, and so now we're rereading that and enjoying it and applying it, and it's so beautiful, right? And we're all reading it with different eyes because we've not read it in recent years. But we also, like, I tell them about my arguments on multilateralism. My mom writes poetry, so she tells, sometimes she'll tell us about her poem, and my father tells us about superconductivity.
So you also spoke about shloka. So what would be your favorite poem and shloka?
So there are several English poems and that I feel very close to, and it depends on what one needs at the time, because poetry is just such a treasure trove that you can tap into. And I'm very grateful that I've learned many poems by heart, which means I can repeat them in my head when I need them. But if you make me choose one, if there's only one poem that I'm allowed to keep, right, then I will choose the Lotus Eaters by Tennyson. And it's been a steady favorite for me since I was in college. And it gives me the perfect pause when things are too hectic. It's got like this haunting cadence. And the poem also gives me the perfect timeout that I need. And it's a melancholic poem, but I just love it. It's just wonderful to know that in that melancholy, we're connected. We're connected not only with Tennyson, but also Odysseus or Ulysses from Greek mythology. So if any of you are into poetry, I will say, all you lovely people, take a look at the Lotus Eaters, because that's my favorite poem. Sanskrit shlok, I'll give you the lots, but I'll give you two for a reason, right? So one that's like just about, for a while it was like, Obama quoted it, and just sort of so many political leaders would quote it, right? And that they only quote the second line, which is Udara Charitanam tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, right? That to the generous minded, the entire world is a family. And the first line is I am Nijaha Paro Veti Ganana Laghu Chetasam. This is mine, this is yours. Only mean-minded people count in this way. But to the generous-minded, the whole world is a family. And hand in hand, that shlok for me goes with another one. And that one is Matravat paradareshu paradraveshu loshtavat atmavat sarvabhuteshu yah pashyati saha panditaha. And what that second line means is whoever looks at all creatures, all beings, as he looks upon himself, he is the truly enlightened one. And And I say those two shlokas because people normally say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and they think, they're referring only to people, right? They're referring to human beings. But I think that Udara Charitanam tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam actually means all creatures, all beings are one family, right? So I really like animals, and I feel like the humanity is doing terrible things to animals at so many different levels, right? Whether it's industrial farming or wildlife, or how we look after our wildlife, or how we treat urban animals, strays, zoo animals. And so this is the shlok that I really like, and I wish everybody lived by.
Because you're so busy, and I mean, you're so focused, what distracts you from work?
So probably my favorite distraction is my hound, my dog. I have a very, very intelligent dog, who's smart and funny, and so it's great always to play with him. And then I always enjoy poetry and grammar. And there's the Bhagavad Gita. I think that's sort of one of my favorite things right now, the Bhagavad Gita.
Okay, so we also have a question in the chat box. Maybe I'll just take a question from there. What are the positive aspects that humanity in general can learn from COVID-19 pandemic? What you said about animals is so beautiful. It's a challenging time for many out there in this pandemic. Do you have a message for them?
Thank you very much, Lakshmi. It's really great to see you here, and thank you for that. Thank you for that lovely question, because I know you also appreciate and feel a connection to animals. So your question is, what are the positive aspects that humanity in general can learn from the COVID pandemic, right? And I think we hear a lot of whinging, right? Everybody's sort of complaining about how hard home office is, and everybody, I keep hearing everybody thinks their own misery is the hardest. And I think, and that's, everybody is putting up with this, right? Everybody faces different difficulties, but they're all difficulties. We're all living the hardships, right, in different ways. And so one of the positives, like for me, has been how closely connected I find myself with people in faraway places, right? We have the technology now, and because I lived abroad for so many years, I've always been a little bit of a digital child. So for me, it's not that hard to feel connected with people internationally, but now others are also tapping in, right? And so there are also people who kind of are very angry with me when I don't want to meet them in person. And I don't want to meet them in person, because I think we all have to do our bit to stop the virus from spreading, right? We all have to do our bit to break the chain. So I'm not hanging out with friends, and some of them get angry, but a lot of them appreciate it, and a lot of them are in faraway places. And the other sort of funny thing that I'll tell you is I was joking about this with some of my friends that, I'm slightly OCD, right? Like I like things to be clean. And suddenly it's great that, I'm no longer the weird one. When I'm pulling out the hand sanitizer, I'm suddenly looking far ahead of the game, right? And I've been teased a lot about, wanting to have my hands clean, and this is, and now this is okay, this is acceptable. It's also a little bit like in the GIGA, we've started doing a lot of our events. We're doing all our events actually online. And this means that we are reaching out to a much broader audience than before, right? So we would have been able to get about 100 people in some of our events. And we had Secretary General Stoltenberg, for example, gave a GIGA Distinguished Speaker lecture, and we had people from the Global South, from Europe, from the US, from Canada, students, the interested public, senior ambassadors. So I feel like in some ways our lives are very constrained, but if we make use of the opportunities, our lives are really reaching out. And the one message that I would have, you say, what's the message? The one message that I would have for people is, if we take the Abstand seriously, if we really try to stamp it out, we really can do it. There will be a world. That world is not so far away. The vaccine offers us great hope that Jubin also referred to, right? Just a little bit more caution right now, and we may be able to save lives, and we can all do our bit to save lives and stop, sickness from being spread unnecessarily. And this is not forever. This is not forever, right? This is not learning to live with the virus. We can get back to somewhere much closer to normal with a little bit of hardship now. So take the hardship, because the good times will follow if we do.
So before I conclude the session, and thank you, Lakshmi, for the question. I also want to thank Amrita for taking out this extensive time and having this conversation. Thank you, Madan Lalji, for always being inspirational and motivational to organize such sessions, and for all of you who have taken out time to join this session. Maybe a final question from my side, and then I'll hand over to Madan Lalji. So what would be your mantra for success?
My mantra for success is, let me think, this is not such an easy one, because I can give you a lot of like the platitudes, right? I can tell you about hard work and commitment and resilience. The two qualities that I think really matter, though, are flexibility. And Keynes said, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? Right? That intellectual open-mindedness, along with a moral compass, so values, right? But you say the word mantra, so I'll give you like my absolute favorite shlok. And that shlok is, Nindantu niti nipunaha yadi vastuvantu lakshmi sama vishatu gachatu va yatheshtam adyaiva maranam astu yugantare va nyayat patha pravichalanti padam na dhiraha. Right? It's from Bhartrihari. It's been a childhood favorite and is to this day. And I try to live by it. And what that verse says is whether the learned people criticize you or praise you, whether wealth comes to you or goes away, whether you live today, whether you are to die today or decades later, the courageous person's feet do not stray from the path of justice and righteousness, from the path of justice, right? And it's about being true. It's about being true to yourself. And I think that's a really good mantra, because if you're true to your values and true to yourself, and you try your best to do the right thing, hopefully success will follow. And Jubin, may I just very briefly answer a question from Gonka? There's like a nice
please go ahead. Please go ahead.
In the list here. And she's asking, which aspect of academia makes you feel happier, the writing, the research, or the teaching? If you made me choose, right, I think it would be writing. But I actually like all three. And I also like the policy engagement part, which is missing from, you have three, but it's actually four for me. And the classics, the novels, I love P.G. Wodehouse, who's, it's humorous, and I think he's brilliant. So, but maybe you can tweet to me and tell me about novels that I should be reading. I don't read enough serious novels. Thank you.
Okay, I think with that, I have my list of questions completed, and I think we are nearly in time. I think it has been an excellent conversation, at least for me personally, learning from a person like you. I think you are an inspiration for many of us, especially coming from an academic background and achieving so much, and also being in Germany right away. So I think maybe in next few months, probably we might also be able to catch up in person. So with that, I would like to hand over to Madan Lalji to give the final remarks. Thank you again, all of you.
Thank you, Jubin. Thank you so much, Amrita, for such a motivating 1.5 hour. I think this will definitely motivate the younger generation. And we would like to hear final word from Amrita only, because she excelled from the childhood till today, and having the background from grandparents to herself. And in this competitive world, because the younger generation, the younger diaspora also, I would say, the Indian younger diaspora, they, whenever there's a competition, and it's a global competition, so how, not only the success mantra, but especially I'm targeting the Indian young diaspora, who, it could be students, it could be entrepreneurs, it could be professionals, and they are competing with this hardcore global competitive world. So your take, Amrita, for them, to motivate them how to excel as you did.
That's very kind. It's very kind of you to say I have miles to go before I sleep. So I appreciate that, but I'm very far from my own destination.
You're humble.
No, it's true. I'm far from my destination. But how to excel? What I would really say is the usual things, of course, the hard work, the commitment. But a lot of people think success is all about efficiency. And I don't think it's all about efficiency. I think it's about values. Right? And there I really do stand by the Bhartrihari line that I told you, that you if you do not allow your feet to stray from the path of justice, if you try and be a good person, then I think you can make a big difference in the world. And something that my dad always tells me, right? I think this is like my dad is a real teacher, right? I mean, he can teach people of every competence, right? Something that he tells me is that every person in this world is able to excel at something. It's just that they don't know themselves what that thing is. You only have to find it. And that is just such a heartening idea, right? That we're all good at something. We can be very kind people, right? We can look after animals. There are all kinds of wonderful things that we can do. So success is measured in different ways. Be who you are, be true to your values. And I think everything else follows. I hope everything else follows. I hope I'm right.
So true. So thank you, Amrita, for being there for us. And we look forward to such extraordinary sessions with you for the consulate in coming days, months, and years, since you are our next door neighbor. And we look forward to your intelligence, your professionalism, your experience to share, not only in the books, but also on such forums. So once again, thank you, participants. Thank you, the technical team. Thank you, Jubin. And thank you, Amrita, for being there for us. And we say good night to everyone, to you, and say my namaskar to your parents. They must be there behind the screen.
And thank you very much, Madan Lalji. Thank you very much, Jubin. And thank you so much for all our wonderful participants. I wish we could speak further, but some of us perhaps will connect via Twitter.
Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Yeah. Stay safe.